Hello guys and welcome back to Coniferia, where in this episode we're going to implement a major expansion to the city of Port Douglas in 3 steps, including a private container port, generic industry, modern redevelopments, as well as a rough rundown section of the Outer Brickville neighborhood. Now, whether you're new or regular here on the channel, you are of course very welcome on board as we are building Coniferia, our fictional and highly detailed city skylines region taking inspiration from New Zealand, Australia, Canada and the good old USA. And as always, if you enjoy my content, I would greatly appreciate liking, commenting, subscribing and enable notifications, as it increases the reach of the channel and puts me one step closer to quitting my job and living off city skylines and good ramen. Back to the episode, we are zooming in on the harbor of the city of Port Douglas, as this is where we'll be doing the major expansions during this episode. And we've got a map here with some fancy overlays so that I can sort of show you guys what we develop here and the steps we take. First up, we are building a small private container port here on the edge of this pier. This is for a shipping company that primarily deals with cargo transport to some of the small island chains that are off the coast of Coniferia. Then we're building a modern redevelopment project right next to it in front of the statue that kind of highlights the stadium. Next up, we're moving across the opposite side of the stadium to build the final outskirts of the Outer Brickville neighborhood. This is going to be the roughest and most rundown part of the neighborhood with the least gentrification going on. And then to sort of finalize, we'll also be initiating a vote on this very interesting square where there is currently just some shrubs and grass. Because some of the Port Douglas City Council politicians have different ideas of what we are supposed to actually do with this area. And as always, I'm gonna let you guys decide because you are the Port Douglas City Council. And we are kicking off the build with the initial industrial area that my little improvised graphic hopefully showcased. This is where we'll eventually have the small container harbor built during this episode. But first I just want to place down some industrial buildings next to these tracks here, and then we'll have the cranes and the ships with the containers dug in here. The overall theme for much of this part of the harbor here in Port Douglas is that the industry has to be of the generic type, so that basically means it can't really be dirty. I mean, it can have noise pollution, that is to be expected, but if we want to make this just somewhat realistic, then it probably shouldn't be major petrochemical companies or companies that have massive smokestacks. So we're going for this generic industrial style here with some warehouses, and I think people can often think of industry as just one thing, even though it's of course a very varied type of development. And I mean, you can be excused for it due to the fact that the game just has a single type of industrial zoning. Of course, the DLCs help break up industries into multiple sub-themes, but in general, for zoning, you, at least initially in the game's history, you just had the industry zoning. I'm hopeful that in City Skylines 2, it's gonna ship out of the box with some more specializations available so that we can build actual warehouse districts, which are quite often found really close to downtown. Los Angeles warehouse districts are like an example of warehouse areas, which are essentially industrial areas that are really close to dense population centers. So that's kind of the mantra here. It's to really place down some noise polluting industries, but not air polluting industries. That's what I'm trying to achieve, at least. I also ventured into creating a construction site here near the industry to resemble the ongoing construction at the early phases of the construction of a modern development here on a lot that probably used to house some sort of industry. And I quickly realized that I I don't actually have all that many construction specific props. I don't have any like worker assets to showcase the workers on the ground, and I don't have all that many construction materials or prefab parts that I can actually use. So it ends up being a bit of a weird construction site all in all, but I guess that's par for the course with my designs. Sometimes there's just something that sticks out a bit. I guess if I'm to do many more construction sites, I should probably browse the Steam Workshop a little more for some more specific assets and props. That's gonna make it a little easier, because all in all, this does end up looking a little weird. But with enough detailing, with enough decals and props, in the end, the result is okay, and I choose to stick with it. Yes, we get to the container and crane part of the small container harbor, and just as quickly I realized that I was lagging a bit in construction props. I realized that for cranes I had a bit of an empty space here as well, because I wanted some really small compact cranes, but with a design that made it obvious that they could offload standard size containers, and I'm not sure if these might be capable of doing that, but at least the like hook mechanism at the end of their arms aren't really suitable for containers. There's a bit of a language barrier here. I don't know if it makes any sense what I'm saying, but basically I would really like to have one of the cranes actively offload a ship I'll place here, so have an actual container attached to it. And I end up doing that even though it's pretty obvious that there's no real attachment point on these cranes for standard size containers. They have hooks, which I guess are more suitable for other types of materials. But once again, I think the saying is that I'm not gonna let perfect stand in the way of good enough, and that's actually a mantra I use quite often. Because if everything has to be perfect and perfectly realistic, then that's a bit of a constraint, I feel, and it's ultimately just hinders creativity a bit and makes it less fun. So we'll stick with it. And as you see here, I'm just adding these invisible parking spaces so that we have some improvised parking for the workplaces down here, because this is obviously still an active part of the harbor. And later on in this episode, you will see me build some much less active parts of this industrial area with some really rundown industry. But I think for now we're just gonna continue with the music. We are moving on to this area here where we have the modern redevelopments. So this is of course a lot where there used to be industrial facilities, but due to different reasons such as outsourcing of jobs and the outsourcing of manual labor jobs basically to other countries where the wages are generally lower. Coniferia has experienced a shift in its job market towards service-based industry, service-based positions, while industrial jobs are fewer in between. It's still a region that does have a sizable amount of industrial jobs, but we'll see more and more of these areas throughout the region as former industrial sites are redeveloped into modern developments. What's obvious here is that I have a bit of a hard time deciding on the type of buildings I want here. I pretty much bought the Plazas and Promenades DLC yesterday, so this is the first time I really get to play with these buildings, and some of them look a little weird, but overall I'm positively surprised. And it gives me hopes for City Skylines 2 that it seems that in the many recent DLCs and content creator packs we've gotten, the overall feel of realism of the buildings has definitely improved. So I'm really hopeful that the developers of City Skylines have sort of gotten the hint, also based on just looking at the workshop, that in general people want a more realistic aesthetic for the base game. I'm really hopeful about this, because I would have hoped that I would have used more vanilla assets throughout the more than 150 City Skylines videos I've created so far, but it's just not been the case, because most of them, they just feel out of place as soon as you start downloading realistic looking assets from the workshop. So I've always felt that's really a bit of a shame, because some of the other city builders, while much less successful, such as SimCity 2013, at least had a much more realistic aesthetic to many of the buildings. Anyways, back to the build. I had an idea of a really tight cluster of buildings here, but not too tall. I want it to be a little more affordable, and what's often the case is that as buildings increase in height, the average price, the average square meter price usually goes up, and you might end up with some really expensive units. And for an area like this, which is close to the stadium, it's close to industry that's still active, and it's close to railway tracks, the desirability isn't all that high, so I thought it would be more realistic with some modern developments that were a little more affordable, basically. And now we're actually taking a little detour because we got a little project that we have to fix by now. Some episodes ago, you guys voted for the future of the community center, and you said, "Nah, go away. We want a fancy, expensive skyscraper instead." So I pretty much owe you all a nice, fancy, expensive skyscraper to house this banking corporation, and that's what we're filling in here. And I mean, I hope you guys aren't disappointed. It was a tough vote, but you've got yourself a tower of glass, money, and speculation now. Use procedural objects to make sure I can just perfectly squeeze and fit in this building amongst the existing buildings here. And in the end, it actually turns out being the tallest, most prominent skyscraper in Port Douglas, at least until now. And I'm pretty satisfied with the results, so I hope you guys are happy with the outcome. And with this towering behemoth of money put in its place, we move on to something very, very different. Because now we are building the outer outskirts of Outer Brickville. That was I use the word outer more than what's legal there, but we're building the outermost brick skirts, the outermost whatever. We're finishing up Outer Brickville, okay, and we're going for a rough, grungy, sort of ghetto-ish feel to this area. This area encompasses some of the residential areas that are closest to what used to be a very dirty harbor. There used to be lots of dirty industries here, and we need to remember, we still have a small oil refinery here and oil export facilities that we built many moons ago. So this was one of the original real working class areas, and today, as economies have shifted, there's been a decline in the amount of manual labor industrial jobs. Areas like this one has really declined, and I place a fancy building here in the corner from the plazas and promenades. You will see me remove it in just a bit because it looked a little out of place. But I guess my attempt with that fancy building there is to showcase that even an area such as this, which is one of the more crime-ridden and deprecated areas of Port Douglas, you will see glimpses of gentrification shine through, because it's also more affordable, and you're still, you're not a too long trip away from downtown Port Douglas, so it's not a terrible placement, right? It's not a bad location per se. It's just less desirable than other locations. But yeah, I eventually removed the building because it's just a little too fancy looking, and then I emphasize row house construction here, which is a real Brickville feature, hence the name Brickville. Not all the row houses constructed here are of bricks though. We've got some wood constructions as well, inspired by San Francisco in particular, but they are far and few in between, and the overall common theme is red brick row houses here of varying sizes, and that's the theme we're continuing here in Outer Brickville as well. Also added a basketball court, and I'm gonna add an additional one to create a small park. But in general, you'll see, especially when we get to the detailing of this area, that I'm using a ton of decals to kind of induce the cracked roads, the damaged pavement and asphalt, and I'm gonna use some props, which are basically just piles of trash extensively throughout this area, to kind of showcase that it's also an area where some of the residents, at least, they don't have a strong attachment to it. They don't care all that much for it, because ultimately many of them are not happy with living here. We'll also see some row houses that are in quite a nice condition, actually, with well-kept gardens, because even in the most depressed of areas, you will of course have those those heartwarming people that really care about their neighborhood, and they try to do their part in improving it. And the vote that will be coming up later on in this episode also very much is related to how cities can or should work towards improving areas like this, or shouldn't, and how much control they should induce in trying to fix areas like this. But there will be more on that when we get to the vote a little later. Now I'm gonna continue with more music, and hopefully you'll enjoy the detailing of this area. that leaves us with the vote. We are finally here. As you guys can see, we've got this parcel of land right here in Outer Brickville that's unoccupied. We'll try that again. Let's just try this again. We've got this wonderful square parcel of land here in Outer Brickville that used to house a pretty rundown commercial establishment that has obviously now been demolished. And basically the city owns the rights to this land, and given the difficulties this area is facing, a local politician from the Green Party, Isabella Ortega, has moved forward with a proposition to have the city invest in building a small public library here, which will also act as a community center, hosting different community activities such as after-school activities for kids and the likes. Opponents of this suggestion has heavily criticized this move, stating that given the current demand in Port Douglas and the need to gentrify and revitalize Outer Brickville, this land should instead be sold off to private investors, and then they can make bids and proposals for what to build here. And of course the city can ultimately choose among those bids for what to approve, but it should be sold off to private capital. But what do you think? That's the interesting part. You are the Port Douglas City Council. After this episode, I'll make sure to make a vote on our community page where you can decide with whatever option you feel is the best one for the city. And of course, as always, I encourage you to partake in any discussion for this vote so that we can get some different opinions. Now for the final build of the episode, a rundown, grungy industrial area nestled in between the train tracks. Not much more to say, just enjoy this nice music.